So now we're going to look at skewers. Skewers are very, very commonly seen in chess, and so it's important to be alert to them. But what you should know is that they're rather similar to pins. And in fact, that's a point of confusion for many beginners. They don't know what the difference is between a pin and a skewer. And well, some people actually describe a skewer as a sort of reverse pin. What a skewer is an attack upon two pieces in a line, such as in this position, for example, with the queen on d5 and the rook on g8, white has to move bishop to b3, attacking the queen, and behind that, the rook. This is where it gets this name of reverse pin. So let's put that move on the board right now. And so the difference between a pin and a skewer is that in the case of the skewer, it's the more valuable piece that is in front. And usually the valuable piece, in this case the queen, will need to move, and then you capture the piece behind it. Now, there are two types of skewers. This skewer here is what we would call a relative skewer. And the reason why it's called this is because the piece that's in front is the more valuable piece, and so more often than not will move, but it doesn't have to move. An absolute skewer, then, would be one where the king is the piece in front. So let's put that on the board. We've simply switched the position of the king and the queen, and here we see an absolute skewer. The king must move. All you need to know about skewers, it's a very, very simple method and works along similar lines to pins. So let us now move on to some interesting and famous examples of skewers so we get a better idea. The first example of a skewer we're going to look at is actually a game played by Bobby Fischer in 1957 in the US Open. And because the skewer occurs early on in the game, we'll actually start from the very first move. Fischer went for e4, c5, Sicilian, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight to c3, g6, bishop to e3, knight c6, f3, bishop g7, queen d2, castle, bishop to c4, everything theoretical, very normal up to now. a6, white now castles queenside, and it's actually preparing, in many situations, launch a kingside attack. But the game takes a different direction after black goes queen to c7, bishop to b3, and now black plays the move b5, and actually gets himself into a little bit of trouble here. The problem for black is that with this move b5, he just opened up this diagonal a little bit more, and Bobby Fischer immediately punishes this. He plays the move knight takes c6, queen takes c6, and now we see that we should already be watching out for a potential skewer because we have the possibility, for instance, of bringing our bishop to d5. It'll be a relative skewer, right? Because the queen here will be the heavier piece it can move, and then that rook will get taken on a8, which of course will be a disaster. Now, if Fischer were to have played the move bishop to d5 immediately, black would counter with knight takes d5. He would actually be okay. Fischer combined the possibility of a skewer very cleverly with the possibility of a fork. He played the move knight d5. Now, the threat is knight takes e7. And in this case, if black eliminates the knight, after bishop takes d5, the skewer is devastating. Black must move his queen, and white actually collects a full rook. So this really is not a good choice for black, but actually he's very limited in what he can do, because he needs to defend this pawn on e7, or at least defend against the threat of forking, which would win a full queen. So if he plays the move queen to b7, now he defends on e7, but after knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, bishop to d5, once again, the skewer is costing black an exchange. If the queen goes to d7 instead, then unfortunately for black, after the move knight b6, white uses a different fork to his advantage. So because of this, actually black has no good choice here. The only other way that he can defend the pawn and step his queen away would be with the move queen to e8. But after knight to c7, a third potential fork has materialized. So that is really a very unfortunate situation for black. If we step back after the move b5, already that weakened diagonal means that after knight takes, queen takes, and knight to d5, it's already game over. In the game, black tried the move king to h8, but after knight takes f6, it's the same again. Bishop to d5 on the next move. In fact, black struggled on with the move e6, but of course, you are down a clean piece against one of the greatest players of all time. It was never going to work out for black, and he did indeed resign a few moves later. So let's take a look now at another example. So here we have a position taken from a quite famous game between Jose Raul Capablanca, known as the chess machine, and he was really a dominant force in the early 20th century and considered one of the greatest talents of the game. And he was playing against another very, very talented player, Frank James Marshall, who made many contributions to the game, and notably he came up with this opening novelty, which to this day is considered very powerful. It's known as the Marshall attack, and you can see that in the Ruy Lopez. It's just something to sort of remember and watch out for because it's been seen at the very highest levels. So anyway, with that aside, let's get to this position, and white has a really, really crushing attack. White is Capablanca, so Capablanca continued with the move queen g6. Here, after queen g6, black brought his knight on f7 to h6. But this move ran into a big problem. Capablanca here uncorked the move rook takes h6. Sacrificing an exchange, black must recapture, so he took back with the pawn. And now bishop takes h6 check. This is very typical, of course it's a different topic, but it's very typical to sacrifice an exchange in order to break through with your attack. So after bishop takes h6 check, black has two choices. He can play king to e7, or he can capture the bishop on h6. Now, if knight takes h6, white will simply recapture on h6, and even though black is up an exchange, the problem is that this threat of rook h8 is just devastating. With the queen on d8 will actually get skewered, and there is nothing that black can do to avoid this, because in fact, if he were to play a move like say king to e7, in fact after queen g7 check, king e8, rook h8, black's king is so weak that he's very much at risk of getting checkmated. So Frank Marshall saw this and decided instead to continue with the move king to e7, which is the best move in the position. But we notice the king is on e7 and the rook here on a7 is undefended. And so they're lined up and Capablanca has the opportunity to create a skewer. This is an absolute skewer. The king must move. And after king to e8, Capablanca could take the rook, that was more than sufficient, but he played the more human move, queen takes knight, check. And now if king to e7, then Capablanca would simply have returned to g7 and then collected the rook. So black played the move king to d7, And now white played queen h7 check. The point for black to have moved to d7 is that he now has the move queen e7. But Capablanca plays a very, very nice move here. Bishop f8. Creating, funnily enough, a rather unusual type of skewer. The queen actually cannot take because of the fact that the king stands on d7. And so black's best bet is to take on h7, rook takes h7 check, and finally this last skewer is deadly. King went to e8, rook takes rook, king takes bishop, and white played king f3, and here Marshall resigned, the dust has settled, and white is up a piece. But really, really beautiful example because of how many times in quick succession the skewering motif is used. So let's take a look at another couple of examples. Here's a game between Wolfgang Unziker and Michael Tal. The more famous of the two is Michael Tal, and he, besides being a world champion, he was considered one of the greatest tacticians of all time, and most chess players will be familiar with him. But here actually it was Unziker, a very, very strong player in his own right, who delivers a tactical blow to Tal that he must clearly not have seen. Let's take a look at what happened. Queen takes g5 check, and we see that actually white is up 3 pawns because black will have to respond to the check. He goes king to d6. If, for example, black blocked, then white could, in the worst case, give this check and follow it up by capturing the rook on a8. So black goes king to d6. Now white captures the rook, and now he's up many pawns. And black makes a mistake here, a big mistake. Queen goes to c7. Can you see what the mistake is, what the crushing blow is for white? You feel free to pause very quickly. Okay, so let's show the answer now. After queen to c7, Unziker played queen takes e5 check. Very nasty combination. After king takes, we see the king and the queen are lined up along the same diagonal. White will have the move bishop f4 check and will win the queen back with interest. He'll end up a piece. So very, very nice and instructive example here. We see all of the pieces lined up along the same diagonal, and white is well placed to take advantage of this with his dark squared bishop and his queen striking at e5. Of course, just to really cement the different types of skewers that are available, the absolute and the relative, we once again here have an absolute skewer since the king must move. Okay, let's take a look at one final example. A brilliant game by former world champion Mikhail Botvinnik. So we'll start from this position, and this is a game played by Botvinnik, as mentioned, against Lajos Portish. Again, very, very strong player of his time, one of the world's best. And here we can see that white just has a fantastic position. All of black's pieces are sort of sitting here at the back. And we also see that his king is in a little bit of danger along this diagonal, also along the second rank for black or the seventh rank for white. And even squares like g6, which may not be immediately obvious to beginners that this is weak, we will soon see how that's a dangerous problem as well. So white continued with the move queen c4 check. Of course, I should say that in return for all of these benefits, black does have an extra exchange on the material, but it's simply not enough. Black here plays the move king h8, and here Botvinnik punishes the weakness on this g6 square. He plays the move knight h4. is a beautiful move because it offers the rook on b7, which black accepted, but after knight g6 check, king to h7 only move, the whole point of the sacrifice is that white now has the crushing move bishop to e4. And we see this beautiful attack along the light squares. The queen is blocking the return of the king to g8, the knight blocks h8, and there is going to be a deadly discovered check, perhaps even a double discovered check in the next move or two. So actually black played the move bishop to d6, and here white captured on e5 with check. Black had to either play the king back or block with g6. Had he played king back to h8, after knight f7 check, his best bet would be to play queen takes knight. And after queen takes queen, white is simply winning. Now he has a lot of material. The reason for this is because if he moves his king back, then white would capture on d6 with not only a check, but an attack on the queen. So huge material gains for white. And so in this position, black's best bet was to move g6. Now white captured on g6. The king stepped back to g7, and really a beautiful finish. You might be wondering, what has this got to do with what we're talking about, which is skewers? We're about to find out. After the move bishop takes h6 check, the king is invited to recapture the bishop on h6. Queen h4 check, the king must go to g7, there are no other squares. And now queen h7 check. And we finally see the skewer in play here. The whole point is that Botvinnik was alert to this possibility, this tactical possibility, with that queen undefended on b7 and the king lured out onto the second rank. So really, really a beautiful sequence, and this is the kind of class that we can expect from players of the caliber of Botvinnik. But I thought that that was a nice example to finish the section off. So I hope you've learned a bit about skewers, and now you've seen some famous examples, and you know that there are two types of skewers, the relative and the absolute, and that a simple way of thinking of skewers is that they're very similar to pins. You might even call them reverse pins. That's it from me, and I'll see you in the next section.